Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're talking about the IMF pressure versus Kenya's reality, or rather budget reality, and of course just touching on the tough choices that the government of Kenya has to make. We've talked about quite a number of key issues there: transparency, accountability by the government of the day, and of course looking at the debt issue. Before we took a break, Christopher and Ruth and Jotham, we were just looking at the issue of accountability, the issue of transparency. But now let's just help the Kenyan who's watching tonight. The issue of debt, because the debt reality we are faced with right now, honestly, it's not very hopeful for the country. It's a reality. But Jotham, when you look at how things look like right now, describing the debt situation we're in right now as a country, what will be your description?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Our debt level is quite high. I think based on the reports that were published early in January, we've just crossed over 12 trillion, and that's the official numbers. I mean, when you incorporate some of these push by IMF on the securitized debt and other contingent liability, we are looking at numbers higher than 13 trillion. On the other side, when you look at our revenue, the percentage that is actually going to service debt, it's roughly at around 67%, somewhere there. And I like what an analysis that was shared by someone a few weeks back, that if you have 100 shillings, you're basically taking 67 out of that to really pay your debt. And that leaves you with only 33 shillings to plan in for your salaries, and then hopefully there will be little left for development. So in terms of sustainability, it's a worrying trend, and I guess that's why some of these reforms are needed now more than ever. But the other push that should make mwananchi worry is that then when you're spending most of your revenues on servicing debt, what happens to these other critical areas? So you'll expect to see that funding for things like education, things like agriculture will go down. And where that is not possible, then it means we still have to go back and get more debt. So we sort of get ourselves into this vicious cycle where we have to still go back to the market and borrow. So the situation we are in is one that is worrying. And I like that these reforms are actually being pushed at this point in time, because then if we continue with that trend, and like my fellow panelists mentioned earlier, you're not able to connect the outcome, then you're left in this situation where you can't really pinpoint where the funds have gone to. So it's a worrying trend in a nutshell, Leah.
And even before we move on to something else here, Jotham, I think a question that begs is the hold from the IMF. Yeah. To what extent do you think this will complicate the debt servicing for Kenya?
A significant extent, really, because IMF, it's, for lack of a better word, it's a concessional facility, meaning that the rates are a bit lower. So if you're not able then to take advantage of such a facility, you're left with the option of going to the commercial market, which, I mean, the restrictions may not be as high, but then the rates there are quite significant. Then if you're going to the external market, essentially, you're also exposing yourself to any changes in forex rates. But also with all these shocks we are seeing, even with the war in Iran, that cost is also bound to go even higher. So those are the options you're actually leaving on the table, that either go to the international markets where you will borrow, and then you're subjecting yourself to these prevailing rates which you can't really predict, or borrow domestically, which at the onset is already higher than what you would have gotten from IMF. But also down the line, we're also saying that you're crowding out the private sector, which limits your resource generation potential as a country. So those are essentially the options you're left with. Yeah.
Christopher, of course, you would imagine there's a Kenyan seated tonight and he's asking, the country is so heavily taxed, and yet we are looking at a debt reality, as Jotham says, is very worrying. It's a cause for concern. And of course, it begs the question, what is the root of Kenya's debt challenge?
Good question. So what happens every year is the Kenyan government sets out how it's going to expend, but it doesn't have the money. So when you see a budget saying that it's a 4 trillion budget, it is not that it is money set aside that the government is going to take. It's just saying this is what I plan to spend on, but I have no money. My capacity, whatever the tax I can collect, is probably 2.2 trillion. So you already are budgeting a deficit. And from there, and that carries on year on year. So that deficit has to be financed by way of debt. Now, even at a household level, if you decide as a house, you have this, we have to spend this much, and you're living largesse, but that is financed by debt. You're eating 70% of the money that you make out of bloated wage bills, duplicated, expenditure. Someone was saying counties have become employment bureaus. Scam, employ, completely no roles. A whole lot of advisories or advisors, both at national, at county levels. Are you seeing the level of expenditure? And remember, we are living on borrowed money. So we come and waste it that way. And of course, there's corruption. Every day, there is reported corruption. So year on year, we are digging a hole. We dig a hole this year, we borrow. Next year, we do the same, we borrow. Why? Because we have drawn a line, or we appear to have drawn a line on expenditure rationalization. You can't touch this. We're happy to borrow, but don't ask us how we spend. That's the unfortunate position that we have got ourselves in. When it comes to taxing, if today you are to increase taxes, I don't want to be a prophet of doom, but I think we would go back to 2024. Because of two things. If we are to use data, there have been 2 reports done. I think there was one that was analyzed on digital borrowing by Kenyans, and that was just to finance subsistence. It wasn't money for development. It was for food, for education, for what, which means they have hit capacity. You can't, it appears like there is no tax capacity, especially on the formal sector. Unless, Leah, you're happy to have your payslip raided again. It means we've hit the ceiling of tax capacity. Now,
when you say we've hit the ceiling of tax capacity,
especially on the formal sector, to increase taxes now is, you know what happened last time? There were people who had actually borrowed. Kenyans borrow, on the strength of a payslip. And then without any notice whatsoever, housing levy came in, some other levies came in. So what happens? You have been a good borrower, but out of not your own doing, you're unable to pay.
Christopher, some of the key things you're mentioning are of great concern indeed. When you talk about we've hit the taxation capacity. And indeed, by the way, right now Kenyans are crying out of the heavy burden from taxation. And we put taxation aside. There's now IMF saying, hey, you need to be very clear on how you're spending your money. We want to see how you're able to pay back to service your debt. And like you say, the government wants to borrow but not tell you exactly how they're spending the money. Comparing this current administration with previous administrations, what would you say? I know there was a time, and many Kenyans usually cite, and even when you talk to Kenyans randomly, maybe in Kamkunji somewhere, you'll hear them say, during the time of Kibaki, things were better. During this time, things were better. What has led us here, Christopher?
Interesting question. To be fair, let's compare the past three regimes. I remember in 2003 when the budget was read, and there was actually a reduction in VAT rate. That's when VAT rate came from 18 to 16. There wasn't much tax increment. In that 1 year, almost 1 more trillion was collected. That was Kibaki's regime. There was goodwill, voluntary compliance. Now, why? Well, it's subject to opinions, but the one thing was a trust. There was clear, development happening. People had a good feel factor. I think the clarion call was tulipe ushuru tujitegemee or something. So right now, if you tell someone tulipe ushuru tujitegemee, they might tell you it's tulipe ushuru mtu mwingine ajitegemee. I think that's the feeling. So when you compare with that one, then you have a problem. When you compare with the one that came next, I think there were some changes that came in, but still it wasn't too much like now. I think taxes in the last few years have really gone quite high in Kenya.
Well, Ruth, when you look at where we are as a country, and I like at least the comparison that Christopher is giving there of previous administrations, I think one of the key things that the IMF and the World Bank has consistently been telling the Kenyan government is, hey, reduce your borrowing. Is there a chance that we can actually reduce borrowing as a country and still survive?
I think that is a really hard question to answer because as per things the way they are right now, there's a lot and a huge appetite for debt. If you compare, and we might not actually be able to touch fingers where the main debts are. And actually, if you remember when this government came to power, that is when we could hear the bad decisions that were made during the previous regime. And sometimes Kenyans, we get lost in the middle of things because even as Christopher is saying, during the Kibaki time, people are still complaining, oh, the president doesn't communicate, he doesn't do this. You all remember that thing, yeah? And when we rolled into the following government, that is when people could tell that the previous regime was better. Because I remember during Kibaki time, the USD against Kenya shillings were around 78 shillings, 75, 78 shillings. But now when it went beyond 100, but then that is when people could remember, by the way, that guy was not that bad, Right now, it's when we can look back at the previous regime and say, they really tried. At the same time, we look also and we are able to tell where the bad debts went because, for example, like the bond that was, the infrastructure, the bond that we were getting to pay like 2 years ago, the one that everyone was looking like the Kenyan government is going to default, they were saying that it was the previous government that took in 2013 and it never did anything. It even actually never went to the public. So that money went to people's pockets. Even right now, it will be very hard for Kenyans to know that. And more so because if you can look at the appetite for debt, even for normal Kenyans right now, it's very high. And just like maybe as it being said, people are looking for money to spend for their daily, food and, basic commodities or basic needs. That said, the whole integrity of debt is really disentangled even within the citizenship because even those ones who have taken the debts in their mobile phone, they're also not repaying. And now looking at the government, you cannot be able to tell where we are heading because the appetite is so high. There are already infrastructure projects and development projects that are being done. Even when you look at the budget, even for the last year's budget, which is the current one that we are having from 2025, 2026, there was still, the allocation for development was very little. However, there is going to still be a lot of debt coming up because there are projects being done. There's a project of Mombasa Road, you know. There's the whole thing about other things that the government want to play catch up. So I don't see this thing about debt appetite going down. When I look at the trips and the people who are coming to look at the partnership with Kenya, all of them are looking at how they can be able to lend to the government. And more so because Kenya is normally looked at as a key strategic partner, especially in Eastern Africa or East Africa, but more so because the private sector in Kenya is normally very resilient. However, if you look at the informal sector that he's talking about, it's very little to fund the fiscal and the tax needs of the whole budget. So the widening of tax base to MSME, which are coming up so much in this country, we haven't seen a lot of development for the last 10, 15 years, and with a lot of innovation going on, then there's a lot of issues that will still need to be resolved, and debt is going to be still, the appetite for it is still going to be very high.
Ruth, there's been a very big conversation about the implementation of fiscal reforms to, you know, so to speak, manage a significant debt burden, looking at, you know, what is happening in the country. When we talk about implementing the fiscal reforms, what are we really looking at before I come to you, Jonathan? Let me just hear from you, Ruth.
I think it's the appreciation of the fact that taxes, and especially the formal sector, has been like really overtaxed. Right now, we can look at maybe almost over 35 all inclusive. So that's a lot of money, actually higher than even corporate taxes. So the formal sector in this country is very little. Actually, it's like 6 million people. So if you look at that, it's only almost a quarter of the population. So what is the rest of the third or 3/4 of the population doing? So fiscal consolidation is ensuring that the 3/4 can be reached and they can be brought on board with clear ways of taxing them. The innovation that are coming on, if it's, for example, the technology areas, they can also be reached because, that the government is able to understand those technical areas and they can bring them on board. If it's actually the subsidy, one of the areas that IMF is pushing on, especially when it comes to expenditure areas, is ensuring that also subsidies is very minimal on that, but also even the wage bill for the government, because sometimes also that wage bill is also very high when it comes to increasing the fiscal consolidation. So it's a whole wide area. But what I can say, Leah, is that policy is good, and we can even follow those steps very well towards the right direction on fiscal areas, but without consideration of our political uniqueness and social realities on the ground, then it's going to be very hard. Just remember recently there was area where the special table had almost actually made the private sector close because most of the small businesses were on the special table and they could not transact or do business. It had to take the intervention of the president to come and say, please ensure, leave these people alone, let them do business, let them pay pole. Without such things, then it's going to be a very difficult area for the government to maneuver, and fiscal consolidation is still going to be a jargon.
Jotham, we have the IMF that has raised fresh concerns at a very difficult time, we must say, when the President, William Ruto, is trying to promise perhaps Kenyans that there is development and the country is headed in the right direction. At the same time, we are faced with a 12.8 trillion total debt. In addition to that, the IMF is asking for transparency. And yet we've seen in not too long ago, the government rejecting the strict IMF demands on austerity and, again, as mentioned, debt transparency ahead of the next general election. Are we entering into dangerous territory as a country?
Yes, indeed. As highlighted earlier, there's a number of things when you're looking at the impact of debt, and some of them we've already mentioned, the fact that we are now borrowing heavily domestically, which is crowding out the private sector. I think that is a dangerous place to be, because what we want is to make sure that we are broadening our tax base and we are able to basically fund our economy. And then on the other hand, we are also seeing that with all these increasing costs, then year on year, we will be forced to always budget for this debt. So if we keep that trajectory and the fact that we can't really increase taxes as it were, it means we will find ourselves in a situation where we can't really sustainably finance for our expenditure. So it's a worrying trend, and one that we need to take immediate measures to address.
We know that, of course, there's a budget reading that's upcoming, Christopher, this year. And of course, Kenyans are seated waiting to see what the next budget will be looking like. In light of where we are as a country, just project for us what you might be foreseeing as far as the next budget is concerned.
Yeah, thank you. So at least we know the expenditure side. They've already told us what they plan to spend. I guess it's the tax measures that we would all be looking forward to. But let's also analyze the timing, what time it is. It is a time when we are getting into an election year. So I don't think any government would want to increase taxes or be on the wrong side of voters around this time. At worst, I expect them to do nothing. But remember, there were some pronouncements made that they will reduce personal income tax, what we call the personal or PAYE brackets. I expect those ones to come in, because what we need right now is really to spur economy and spending. So personal income tax brackets, the tax exempt amount that is now currently 24,000, that was planned to go higher, and then to widen the brackets so as to reduce tax on individuals. But while at it, I would propose to scrap housing levy altogether, on the simple fact that data shows that there hasn't been a lot of uptake. I think there was interest, but no financial. Not many people are willing to pay. So possibly just finish with the stock that we have, and then give people some relief, especially around this time when the external control. When there are external factors like the Iran war that has has made so as people can have more spending power.
All right.
While at it, reduce VAT, especially on fuel, as an intervention. It could be temporary, but remember, we are back to where we were in 2022 when this government was taking over. VAT was at 8, on fuel was 8%. So basically gone back there. But if this is a crisis, just like we did for COVID, please give people relief. Zero rate the whole thing.
All right. Thank you so much, Christopher.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a very insightful discussion, indeed one that's very critical at this time. Thank you for making time. Jotham Wadongo, Development Finance Specialist from the Expertise Global, thank you for making time. Okay, and of course also Ruth Kinyanjui, an economist and governance expert. Your views valued in this discussion. Thank you for making time. And of course also Christopher Kirade, a tax partner at the EY. Quite insightful remarks there, Christopher. Thank you also for making time. This has been a discussion on the IMF pressure versus Kenya's budget reality. I don't even want to repeat what my panelists have said tonight because it's not really very encouraging. But of course, we hope that the government will at least consider the people that it is leading and their welfare indeed. And thank you very much for watching. Again, my name is Leangare, my sign language interpreter. Tonight has been Angel Lois. As always, it's a pleasure to have you join us. We appreciate your company. Thank you for keeping us company to this very moment. Have a good night and God bless you.